This is hopefully going to be another quicker one take video. I've been on a roll of doing these in one take and just kind of, rambling without a script, honestly, and just talking about a topic that I've found easily applicable to a lot of lifters on my roster. So for this video, I'm going to not necessarily make this only on backend deloading. Like, I think there's a lot of good material out there just on the concept of backend deloading. So I'm hoping to not really repeat some of that information, but more so emphasize how applicable I've found this concept within the roster that I coach. Because, and this is probably going to be something along the title of this video, I back end deload almost every single person on my roster in some fashion. I think there's only one athlete I coach who I do not back end deload, and it's because she's so insanely stimulus driven. Uh, but beyond that, I back end deload. I think every single person I coach, pretty much, in some fashion, whether that be one set, one session, one exercise, or an entire, back off, every single back off set through an entire week. It's on a spectrum. So I'll talk about some general like introductory information, and then I have three case studies which I will go through. I'm going to run through my lifter Emily's programming on deadlift and squat, my lifter Mina's programming on deadlift and squat, and my lifter Carlos's programming on deadlift and squat. And you'll notice I don't have anything here on bench. I think bench is one of the lifts that oftentimes I just don't really see as much of an application to back end deloading as squat and deadlift. So I'm not going to go over that. I think there's definitely cases where it can be applied, but specifically for squat and deadlift, I find that lifters need this more frequently than not. So what is back end deloading? If you guys have never heard that term, the way I personally view a back end deload is essentially pulling back in some fashion at the end of a training block. Oftentimes we'll see a traditional deload look like an additional week come the beginning of a new training block. So for example, say someone runs routine 4 week blocks. That's a pretty standard staple in the powerlifting world right now. Someone runs traditional 4 week blocks. Maybe after 3 of those 4 week blocks, someone gets really fatigued, really tired, really beat up. Maybe we'll tack on an additional deload week after a few of those blocks. So it'll just be 1 week of an intentional deload. So everything is pulled back in some fashion, intensity, volume, whatever that looks like for the given lifter. And then go back into a 4 week block after that. So it's essentially an additional week that we are programming by means of recovery, okay? So in order to have a bit of more seamless transition block to block, I find that deloading is better done at the end of the block in certain areas to allow a smoother transition into the next block, so you don't waste, and again, waste is a bit of a subjective term here, but waste an additional week by needing to deload and needing to recover in that sense. And I think it's more of a fatigue management game at the end of the day. So, like I said, what is backend deloading? We are, instead of taking an entirely additional week and tacking it onto the beginning of a new training block, instead we are pulling back at the end of the current training block to allow a nice and smooth transition into the following one. There are two or three main areas that I see a back-end deload be applied for the most part. I'd say two main areas, right? So the first one is to inflate numbers. What I mean by that is oftentimes when we are looking to get performance a little bit better or get a performance boost in some fashion or inflate a certain top set at the end of the block, right? We are going to pull back on the session leading into that session, okay? We're going to back end deload, we'll say the secondary day on week 4 if it lands before the primary day on week 4. And that's one case I'll see, right? The meaning of the purpose of back end deloading is oftentimes to inflate numbers, and I'll get to that. The second big time is pretty much the inverse. So to recover, instead of to inflate numbers, we're going to try to back-end deload to recover and have an easier transition into the next block. And oftentimes, that's going to be something happening after the primary session from that the final week of that block. Um, so those are the two times I see that used. I will use those interchangeably. I will use them at the same time, and I will use them, one or the other. Depends on the athlete, depends on their training layout, depends on where squat and deadlift are throughout the week and how they typically respond to those lifts. And Emily, Mina, and Carlos are all really good examples where both of these examples that I just mentioned can be applied to all three of these lifters. So to reiterate, in my opinion, back-end deloading can be used in two main cases. One is in order to inflate numbers, and that's oftentimes leading into the session that we're trying to inflate, so like an end of block primary day, or it's going to be to recover from something heavy, to allow a more seamless transition into the next block. And oftentimes I see that pullback happening after the end of block primary session. So to start with Emily, her deadlift training is pretty simple. We've got her secondary session, and I'll see if I can actually zoom in here a little bit. Her secondary session is going to be on Monday, and her primary session is going to be on Thursday. And you can see I have all of her deadlift training written out here. This is pretty much a normal week of training for her, okay? And then right here is going to be the end of block. So that's going to be where things differ, because again, the back end deload here is specifically during the final week of the block. So I just copy pasted her typical week 4 out of 5, and then I copy and pasted her typical week 5 out of 5. So the final week of her block is going to be week 5, and the second to last week of her block is going to be week 4. So her typical week 4 secondary deadlift looks like a full reset triple into a 1x8. And we're going to push that to around a 6.5 RPE, and that 1x8 is going to auto-generate based on that triple. So you can see the range here is at 270 to 285. Her primary session on Thursday is going to be, this is just an example session. Rep ranges are going to fluctuate and undulate and things like that, but this is just an example. In this case, she has a single into a triple into a 2x5. So that's going to be her typical week 4. Nothing here is pulled back per normal. This is normal training for her, okay? Comparing to her week 5, which is the final week of her block, the areas that we're going to back-end deload here on deadlift is really only her secondary day. And the purpose of this, again, going back to the two reasons why I back-end deload for people, the purpose of this is to inflate the numbers a bit going into that week 5 deadlift, and it works like a charm. Some of you who are watching this might be thinking, why would we do that if we're missing out on valuable workload? And the reason being is I don't really think we are missing on valuable workload. All we're doing here is taking a little bit less weight on this full reset triple and getting rid of the set of 8 to inflate performance on this week 5. And she runs 5-week blocks. So we're taking one session out of the 5-week blocks, the 5 weeks per block that she runs, and just pulling it back a little bit. So it's not like we're missing a week of training. It's not like we're missing a top set in general. We're not skipping a session. We're not reducing volume in half. It's nothing crazy. We're just doing a little bit of a pullback. And you can see the difference in RPE in the range here. I have a very, very low RPE. Obviously, it's really hard to judge that, but we're kind of basing this off of the load range, obviously. So like week 4, her typical secondary deadlift looks like a 270, 285 full reset triple. And then the next week, in order to inflate that week 5 primary day, we'll go all the way down to like 225, 240 range, and then that will boost her performance on this session. So that's a good example of using a backend deload to inflate the performance of the upcoming session. So that's how we typically go about things with Emily on deadlift. For squat, we do the inverse. So her primary squat is on Monday, and her secondary squat is on Friday. So that means that if we were to back-end deload something here, it wouldn't make sense to back-end deload a top set, because that primary squat is at the beginning of the week. That's the performance at the end of the block that we're trying to get to come in really strong. So the way we go about things is that single on week 4 is going to be pretty typical. We're going to have around a 7 to 8 RPE. And that single, or that top set on the primary day, again, this is just an example session, that primary day top set is also going to progress from the previous week. So we're going to go around the 7 to 8 RPE to a 9 RPE, and this entire primary session for her stays progressing. Like, we're going to have still heavy back offsets on this day. Now, it's the secondary squat that we are going to back-end deload. So you can see on week 4, this is going to be a typical just progressed secondary day from the previous week. So we're going to have 2 high bar sets of 3 into 3 high bar sets of 6. The top high bar triple is going to be around 215 to 235. However, on week 5, we're going to pull that back. And the reason being is it comes after the primary squat, and it does not influence that primary squat because it comes after. What's going to be influencing that primary squat is the week 4 secondary squat. So I don't want to pull that back from her. We know, I know that she's very stimulus driven on squat and has done very well in the past from having this secondary squat pushed, but we don't need it to be pushed after she's already taken that heaviest exposure block. In some cases, absolutely we can, but if we want a nice seamless transition into the next block, what I've found for Emily is this week 5 out of 5 secondary squat day, we pull back, and that's going to be the area that gets back end deloaded. So in short, deadlift, we back end deload for her to inflate performance on that week 5 Thursday. For squat, we back end deload to recover on that week 5 secondary squat on Friday and have a nice and easy transition into the following block. So a nice example of the best of both worlds here. Going into Mina for my next example. Again, this applies on both squat and deadlift for her. So for her primary deadlift, we place that on Monday. That is going to be just a top set of 1 to 3 with reascending back offsets. And did I say Monday? I meant to say Wednesday. And her secondary deadlift is going to be on Saturday. That's just going to be a set of 7. So 1 set of deadlift regardless. We back end deload Mina's deadlift in 2 areas. On that final week of the block, we're going to still take that heavy primary day top set, but we're going to pull back on the back offsets here and pull back on the secondary day as well. We've seen a decent amount of fatigue and general overlap between squat and deadlift for her. So I find that when we go from that primary deadlift on Wednesday to her primary squat, which comes on Saturday, and I'll talk about that, it can be really beneficial for her to have the more volume work and the back offsets, whatever you want to call it, on that Wednesday to be chilled out going into that primary squat. So another way to view this is you can kind of view her week 5 deadlift as taking a week 5 top set with week 1 back offs into secondary day. So you can see the change we made here. Week 4 out of 5, we take 3 sets of 5 all the way up to a 7 RPE. Week 5 out of 5, we only take 2 sets of 5, and it's below a 5 RPE for both of them. So very, very easy, and then we chill out on that week 5 secondary day. Pretty simple stuff. And you can see the purpose of the back end deload here is to recover and have a seamless transition into the following block. So kind of the second route that I go about things here. For Mina's squat, we are going to do pretty much the exact same thing. So there's no inflation of numbers here. There's no pulling back before a primary session to kind of taper into it or anything. It's pretty simple stuff. So she's going to have her secondary squat Tuesday and her primary squat Saturday. Let's say Saturday, not Tuesday. But yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to progress that week to week. So week 4 secondary squat, we're going to like a 7 RPE. Week 5 secondary squat, we're going to 8 RPE or so. So it's going to progress, and all the back offsets here are kind of linear as well in the sense that we are not pulling back there going into either Saturday. The only area we pull back is because this primary squat is at the end of the week. We keep this top set at the week 5 out of 5 RPE and intensity threshold that we're going for, but we pull back big time on the back offsets. And again, the reason being is this volume work here and this just general total workload for back offsets here does not influence an upcoming primary squat day. Doesn't fuel anything. It just, pulling back here helps us have a smooth transition going into week 1 of the next block. And one final example, and this one's a bit more complicated, and this is why I wanted to use Carlos as an example here, is because we back-end deload a ton for him. He's a bit more of the example of where almost everything on squat and deadlift in some sense is back-end deloaded. And it just works out really well for him. Like he's making super, super good progress on both lifts, just with our strategy that we take here. So Carlos is another 5-week block runner, and I picked 3 athletes of mine that all run 5-week blocks just to kind of keep the pacing here similar and keep the examples uniform in that sense. So he's going to be deadlifting on Wednesday and Saturday. That secondary deadlift is going to be on Wednesday. He's going to do 2 sets of 7. One of them is going to be paused. The primary deadlift is going to be a triple with a long hold single into a 2x5. That's going to be on Saturday. And so week 4 out of 5, we don't touch a thing. Like that's going to be pretty normal progress, right? Nothing's going to be getting touched because it's not the final week of the block yet. So what we do for him is we do both options of back-end deloading. So we take the approach of trying to inflate the numbers on that primary deadlift session by coming in a bit more recovered and pulling back on the session leading into it, so that Wednesday secondary deadlift. And we also pull back on the primary day back offsets to recover going into the next block. So what that looks like is for week 5, we're going to do a very easy secondary day. So what is normally paused deadlift 1x7, comp deadlift 1x7, we're just going to do a paused deadlift 1x6. It's going to be a lower RPE, and you can see how the ranges compare here. It's going to be about 25 kilos lighter on that top end. So it's a big pullback. And that's it. That's all we do. And it gets this week 5 Saturday coming in very strong without losing a ton of total workload, without losing a ton of valuable stimulus. And again, these are 5-week blocks, so it's not like we're missing out on 1/6 of the total workload here. We got 5 weeks to work with. So this primary day, we're going to push that single hard, and then the back offsets are going to be pulled back. And you can see during week 4 out of 5, we have these rep sets being pushed pretty hard. So he's got like a 7.5 RPE on this top triple, and the back off 2x5 here is going to drop only 9% from that 1x3, versus week 5 out of 5, we're going to push that single hard, because again, that's the set that we're trying to inflate and get to come in really strong and performance indicating. And then the back offsets here are going to be what's chilled out. So it's just going to be a single kind of like a practice set of 5 here. That's very, very easy. And then only one set of 5, and this is supposed to auto-generate off of that. But really simple stuff. Just getting rid of a set of 5, a total set here. So it's going to be 2x5 instead of a 1x3, 2x5. And the intensity of those back offsets is pulled back. For his squat, Carlos squats 3 days a week. This tertiary day is not super relevant to this example because we do not touch it. And this is honestly a bit of a filler session for him that we are keeping in because squat is going super well. We're not even entirely sure how needed it is. We just do not touch it because squat is making quite linear progress right now, and I would hate to intervene with that. So you can kind of ignore the tertiary day. I'm just leaving that in for the sake of this example to accurately give an example of what his training looks like. So week 4 out of 5, his tertiary squat is on Sunday. It's just going to be 2 percentage-based sets of paused high bar squat. Really simple stuff. The load does not change throughout the entire block. For his primary squat on Tuesday, he's going to be doing a top rep set with reascending high bar work. So week 4 out of 5 is going to be his heaviest high bar work because we back-end deload that in week 5 out of 5, and I'll get to that. Then his secondary squat is going to be on Friday, also his heaviest secondary squat of the block, with a whole other week to go, again, because we back-end deload that as well. So instead of, on deadlift, taking the approach of trying to inflate a certain set, we are only back-end deloading squat by means of trying to recover and have a more seamless transition into the next block, because nothing leading into this, nothing leading into this week 5 top set on squat is pulled back. Okay, so the session leading into that week 5 heaviest session of the block is his tertiary day, which is 2 days beforehand, which does not change. The session before that is going to be the heaviest secondary day of the block. So we just continue to ramp up intensity going into that final heaviest exposure. And then the second he takes that top set on squat, everything for the rest of the block on that week 5 is pulled back. So he's got his primary squat back offsets here, back end deloaded. His entire Friday secondary day is back end deloaded. You can take a look at the ranges and the RPE here. I'll kind of hold this screen up for a bit. But if we're just looking at his primary and secondary day, he's going to have that week 4 secondary squat all the way up to his 6.5 RPE. In this example, the top end range is 207.5. For his week 5 secondary squat day, it's going to be sub 5 RPE. Top end range is 177.5. So an entire 30 kilos lighter week 4 to week 5 on the secondary day. Again, that comes after the primary squat. And then if we're looking at the primary squat back offsets, we're going to go from a 3x4 reascending high bar up to 192.5 on week 4 out of 5. And then on week 5 out of 5, we're just going to do 2 sets of that high bar squat pulled back big time, top end at 165. So almost 30 kilos lighter there. And similar to what I said with Mina, we are essentially doing Carlos's week 5 heaviest squat exposure of the block, right? Week 5 top set, but with week 1 everything else. Week 1 tertiary, again, that doesn't change, but week 1 tertiary, week 1 primary squat back offsets, week 1 secondary squat. That's another kind of way you can visualize things here, because just from a fatigue management perspective, and without, causing the boulder to kind of, or the snowball to continue to roll and roll and roll by pushing this week 5 secondary squat or this week 5 primary to back offsets too hard and thus impacting the following block negatively for him. It's really easy and productive from what we found to do is to just pull back on literally everything except for that top set. So you can see we're taking both of those approaches where we're inflating numbers and recovering on deadlift, and then on squat we're just recovering going to the next block. And what we do find is because that primary deadlift is on Saturday, he comes in extra recovered from that big old back end deload on most of his squat stuff during the final week of the block. So those are some really good examples of back end deloading with a consistent block length of 3 different athletes on my roster. Again, I do this for almost everyone, and I'll kind of circle back to the whole point of this video is the reason why I do this for almost everyone on my roster is twofold. One is to have a very easy transition block to block and continue to wave load without having kind of this waste of a deload week. Obviously, there's going to be times when we need an additional deload week or an intro week, whatever you want to call it, a pivot week, just an additional week tacked onto someone's normal block length, right? There's going to be times that someone gets sick, maybe takes a week off, comes back from vacation. We need to line up timing going into meet day. I just made a YouTube video on that, so if you haven't watched that, definitely give that a watch if what I'm saying here, that doesn't make sense. But there's going to be times when we do need an additional week somewhere, but personally I like to avoid doing that as, quote, a deload. So that's the first reason, is to just transition block to block better and have a bit better of a, kind of like a routine without needing to add this additional week. And the second reason is I find it has a lot to do with yielding productive training at the end of the block. A lot of the time we'll see athletes take a really heavy top set, and maybe it's early in the week and they've got an entire end of the week ahead of themselves where maybe a really heavy session where nothing is back end deloaded, or they have a really heavy primary day and a few days later they still have another really heavy secondary day to go. That can just be a lot for certain athletes from both a psychological and physical perspective. So I guess in that sense, the purpose behind that is to give athletes a little bit of a breather psychologically without it overall impacting things. And kind of like I mentioned, there's going to be those two reasons that I do put this into practice: to recover and to inflate numbers and boost performance. And it really just comes down to where we're doing the back end deloading relative to the end of block primary session, because that is going to be the ultimate indicator for how that block went. Oftentimes lifters are going to be hitting PRs there. Oftentimes that's going to be the heaviest exposure over macro cycle or a microcycle, whatever it may be. And we want that to be a really promising and really predictable expression of top end strength. And in order for us to do that, there's going to be times that we need to recover and taper and inflate those numbers. But there's also going to be times that can really beat people up, and it can be a safe and very low interference strategy to take to manage the fatigue from those top sets without it overall impacting things. So I hope that makes sense, but I do end up finding myself doing this for, like I said, pretty much my entire roster, because I find it so productive. I find it so low interference, low impact in the grand scheme of things. Like, I don't really see any drawbacks to doing this. And again, it still allows us to productively kind of take the end of block, primary session, or the end of block heaviest session, top set, whatever, and allow that to be performance indicating without it overall interfering with some other productive training that may come soon after. So that's going to be it for the video. If you guys liked the 3 case studies I gave, if you're interested on some more tidbits on either Emily, Mina, or Carlos's training, feel free to shoot me a message on Instagram, ask some questions in the comments, or whatever it may be. But yeah, any questions, definitely leave them below, and I'll see you guys at the next video.